Raven, Are you there? Aren't you? You always are, I needed to tell you this, and only you, because no one else would believe it, and because, since that night, I know the walls listen. Maybe you, my old winged friend, are the only living creature that can still hear this without going crazy. The house was a legacy, family inheritance. It was hidden in the damp hills of Galicia. Spain, like an old scar, that time tried to hide, but failed. My great-uncle Ramiro, a man of few words and many books, lived and died there. Alone, no one in the family wanted the house afterward. It was considered gloomy, worn out, cursed by poorly. Told stories and whispered at funerals. But I am an archaeologist. Raven, I live off the voices buried in time, and that house seemed to call me the first time I saw it. I felt a chill that didn't come from the cold. It was a different kind of shiver, as if my bones had recognized that place before my mind did. Damp stones, covered in moss, small windows like half-closed eyes, and silence. A silence so thick it seemed alive, as if the house itself were watching me. On the first night, I heard whispers low, originless. I thought it was the wind, or maybe the old structure creaking. But the whispers formed words in ancient Galician. They were names. On the second day, I found the diary hidden under a loose board of the basement floor. It was Ramiro's, written in red ink, but it wasn't ink. Raven. The stone cries when memory weighs heavy. The foundations of the house are made of bones and promises. It only sleeps while we forget. These phrases repeated among ramblings and accounts of ancient rituals, pagan cults, and human sacrifices. Ramiro believed that the house had been built over a pre-Christian sanctuary, and that the house was the living temple. On the fifth day, it rained, and it was then that I saw the blood. It was running down the stones of the living room wall. Slowly, thickly. The smell was of oxidized iron and wet earth. I touched it. It was warm. I thought about calling the police. But how to explain? A house, that bleeds. Raven, have you ever seen a house bleed? That night, I dreamed of children crying, wrapped in white cloaks, walking in circles around a fireplace made of bones. A woman with long hair, her face covered by black veils, whispered to them in a language I didn't know, but understood. She said, "The stone keeps, the flesh pays. The blood renews." I woke up with my face covered in dirt. I was on the basement floor. I don't remember how. I got there. It was there that I saw in the corner. There was an opening in the ground, a round hole, like a dry well. But it wasn't dry, inside a heart. Pulsed, yes, Raven, a heart. Giant, beating slowly. As if the house lived. I ran away. I spent days in cheap hotels, trying to convince myself it was a hallucination, hysteria, trauma. But you know the worst part, Raven. The worst part wasn't seeing the heart. It was knowing that it recognized me. A few weeks later, I needed to go back, to collect documents, settle legal matters. When I entered, I found the walls dry, clean, as if nothing had happened. But the floor of the living room, Raven, the floor had marks, footprints, childlike. I followed them to the basement. The hole was covered with stones again, but there was something different, a sound, muffled, something like a breath. Raven, I tried to walk away, tried to forget, but you know how it is. These things, don't leave us. They mark us. And since then, every time it rains, no matter where I am in the world, I smell oxidized iron, and I hear the stone cry. Tell me, Raven, are houses like nameless tombs? When we die, do we become part of them? Or, worse, do some houses, when forgotten, swallow us alive, and continue living with our echoes trapped in the walls? I don't have answers, only questions. And scars. Thank you for listening to me, Raven. But if one day you pass through Galicia, and find an old house made of dark stone, don't enter. Don't look at the windows. And above all, don't listen to the voices, because they listen to you back. Raven. Listen to me carefully this time, because what I have to tell you may not make sense now, but maybe it will help someone not to open that door. It all started when my mother died. She left me an old house in Lisbon, in the East neighborhood. It was beautiful, in ruins, tall, narrow, with wrought iron bars and windows that creaked like old church hinges. I was broken, inside and out. I accepted the inheritance more out of impulse than love. I thought that by renovating the house, maybe I could renovate myself, but Raven ... There are places that were not meant to come back to life. There are spaces that only exist to guard things that should remain forgotten. On the second floor, there was a locked door. It was small, lower than normal. The carpenter who came to install new cabinets jokingly said, "That one, better leave it as it is. Some doors open more than we want to see." I laughed at the time. Now ... I can only feel chills. I found the key in a little box inside the fireplace. It was warm, even though the fireplace was cold. And the sound ... When the key entered the lock, I heard a crack, like a bone breaking. The attic was covered in dust, but it wasn't ordinary dust. Raven, it smelled like burnt hair, and there ... right in the center was a small rocking chair turned toward the wall. I didn't touch anything. I just watched on until I heard the voice, soft, crawling. "It's dark here." The sound wasn't coming from me, nor from the house, but from the chair. It ... was rocking. By itself. I ran. I closed the door. I locked it with 3 padlocks, but it was useless that night. I heard whispers, not words, but childish noises, suffocated giggles, murmurs of those playing hide and seek, and the footsteps ... small, dragging across the ceiling. I lived alone. I spent the following days hearing the noises grow louder, first at night, then in the afternoon, and finally, in the morning. I tried to sleep on the couch with headphones. Nothing stopped the sound. It didn't come from the air. Raven, it came from inside my head. I went to the registry office to research the former owners. The house was built by a doctor in the late 19th century, Dr. Augustus Simoes, a specialist in child psychiatry. The papers said. But I dug deeper and discovered that, in the 1920s, the house was shut down. An anonymous complaint stated that Dr. Simkes kept sick children locked in the attic, in experimental sessions of electroshock and sensory deprivation. The house was sold, and then forgotten. I returned to try sealing the attic, with boards and cement. But when I went up, ... the chair was facing me, and someone, or something, had written on the wall, in small, scratched letters, "I'm here." I couldn't take it. I yelled, cried, pleaded, "What do you want?" And the answer came, ... in my own whisper, "Play." I went to the kitchen, got gasoline, and returned. I threw it all, Raven. The wall, the floor, the cursed chair, but the fire wouldn't catch. The flame seemed to flee from the wood, as if the house didn't want to die that night. The whispers called me by name, no longer from the ceiling, but inside the pillow, inside the bathroom mirror, inside the sound of the kettle boiling. And then I saw the child, on the edge of my bed, without eyes, without a mouth, but with a face resembling mine. She reached out her hand, and before I could react, she whispered in my voice, "Now you live here with me." I woke up in the attic, not knowing how I got there, but this time, the chair wasn't empty. It was waiting for me. Since then, ... something changed. Sometimes, while I talk to people, I see their gaze drift away, as if they are seeing someone behind me. They tell me I talk to myself, that I respond to voices that don't exist. But you believe me, don't you, Raven? That's why I tell you. Because the attic is still there, sealed, but alive. And the worst part, Raven, Is that now? I hear whispers from other houses too. Tell me, are we surrounded by living houses, thirsty for cracked souls like mine? Do the voices not just want to be heard, but to echo through us? Don't enter old houses. Don't open doors that are too small. And if you hear whispers coming from above your head, pretend you didn't hear. Raven, today I don't know if I'm telling you so you'll understand me, or so you won't forget me. Because, after what happened in that house, I feel like I'm fading away, as if I left a piece of myself down there, in that basement that shouldn't exist. It was a simple house in the countryside of Minas. I was hired to evaluate the property, one of those old, colonial-era houses, with high ceilings and heavy wooden windows. The kind of place that seems to breathe and sigh with the passing of the years. The owner, Donna Elvira, already very old, was waiting for me on the porch with a blanket over her shoulders and deep-set eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in centuries. There's something you need to see, but you need to be strong. The house was strangely silent, the kind of silence that screams. Elvira guided me to a door in the back, covered with an old woven rug. I asked what was behind it. She simply said, "The steps. They go down by themselves." I laughed, like any skeptic who has seen too much. But when I pulled the rug, I saw the latch and the old lock. I opened it. The air that came out from inside was damp, cold, and sweet. Yes, Raven, sweet, like rotten meat soaked in honey. And there were steps. But the strangest thing was that I was sure that when I looked at the house plan, there was no basement at all. I descended 3 steps. It felt more like a tunnel than a room. The ceiling curved, with darkened wooden beams, and the steps were damp, slippery, as if someone had washed them with blood and let them dry halfway down. I heard a crack, a creak, a concave sound, as if something was descending behind me, but had no feet. I ran to go back up, but the steps had multiplied. The top was farther away, and as I climbed, Raven, the sound kept descending. I turned around, went back to the end, and there I saw a corridor that hadn't existed before. On the wall, old newspaper clippings nailed with rusty nails. News of missing children, of priests who disappeared, of workers who never returned from the night shift. And at the end of the corridor, a room, a chair, a table, and a mirror. But the mirror did not reflect the room, only me. But, with a difference in the reflection, my eyes were sewn shut. I screamed, I ran, I fell, and then I heard the steps. Yes, Raven. They were going down by themselves, one by one, as if an invisible, bony, grotesque being were walking with enormous sharp claws. But instead of walking, it was dragging itself. I hid between loose beams, holding my breath. The sound passed close to my face. It was like dragging a sack of bones and teeth across the floorboards. And then, a voice. "Come back. Someone needs to go up in your place." Raven. The house was not just a structure, it was a system. Like a living organism, with entrance and exit. But the exit required a trade. I went back to Donna Elvira, gasping, dirty, insane. "There's something down there. That is not a basement." She just looked at me and said, "You went down. Now someone needs to go up." And then I saw her legs were as dry as tree branches. They were made of wax, brittle, as if they had been waiting for years for someone to accept the exchange. I ran, I fled. I never finished that report, but every night since then, I hear stairs going down inside my house. I don't have a basement. I don't have a basement. I don't live in a ground floor house anymore. But even on the 8th floor, they go down by themselves. And sometimes, they stop. Behind my door, Raven, listen to me, because if one day you wake up to the sound of stairs going down by themselves, don't investigate, don't approach the door, and never, ever say, "Who's there?" because they only descend when someone is ready to go up. Raven, I need to tell you this before the memory consumes me. Because since that day, I no longer dream. I just remember, Another life, I had just moved into an old house, inherited from my maternal grandmother. The house had been vacant for decades. The last resident was a distant relative who died in 1921. They say, under strange circumstances, the place had the smell of forgotten objects, of burnt paper, mold, and old perfume, a sweet and dry aroma, like a flower left between the pages of a book for too long. In the bedroom on the 2nd floor, I found the mirror, tall, with a cracked golden frame, adorned with twisted rose designs, as if they were in agony. The glass was cloudy, and even when clean, it never reflected clearly. It was like looking into a lake covered in mist on the first night. The sound began tap, 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 like slender fingers tapping on the frame. I got up and went over there. Nothing but the sound stopped when I looked on. The second night, I dreamed of her, a pale woman, dressed in white, with dark eyes like open holes in the ground. She walked slowly, dragging the veil, and said, "I am still waiting, Raven, On the 3rd day, the mirror began to reflect a different room. The same room, but as it was 100 years ago, with lace curtains, an old radio, and a bed made for the wedding night. I began to investigate at the local library. I found a news article dated April 11th, 1921. Young bride disappears on the eve of her wedding. The family claims she went insane and fled, but neighbors say they heard screams, Several reported seeing the girl running through the house covered in blood, but the body was never found. She vanished, as if she had been swallowed by her own. Home, Raven, On the 4th night, she spoke to me through the mirror. "You're back, my love. You left me here, and that's when the veil fell." She wasn't haunting me, she was waiting for me, waiting for the groom me. I began to remember fragments, like shards of glass in my mind. The ring on the bedroom floor, the blood on the stairs, the rain on the wedding day, and the fear of getting married, of loving, of facing what I felt. I fled, left her there, and the house swallowed her. On the 6th night, I went to the mirror. I bought an old dress at an antique store. I put on the veil. I looked at myself. I didn't see my image. I saw her, waiting, reaching out to me. "Now that you see me, you can free me." And then, the mirror cracked. But it didn't break, for the first time. I saw the entire reflection, her, smiling, and behind her, me, younger, frightened, with a white carnation in my pocket and hands. Trembling with regret, the whole house shook. Lights flicker. The air became light. And for the first time, I heard something I never expected. "Thank you." The next day, the mirror had disappeared in its place. There was only an old ring, rusty, and a yellowed note, handwritten. "If not in this life, then in the next, but find me." Since then, Raven, I dream, but never with myself, always with her, living other lives. Sometimes she is a florist, sometimes a teacher, sometimes a girl sitting by the window, waiting, and whenever I meet her, something in me awakens, as if that story never ended. As if the mirror were still calling. Me, Raven, ... Sometimes what we call haunting, ... is just an echo of an unfinished love. A bond broken in time. A promise made before God, ... but unfulfilled. Raven, today I need to tell you something that still keeps me awake at night. Something that makes me question whether I was just a witness, ... or part of something bigger. It happened 3 years ago, on a business trip, in a small town in the interior of Minas Gerais. It was one of those old hotels, with faded red carpet, creaking stairs, the smell of damp wood mixed with cheap lavender. I had made the reservation online. Everything was fine, room 207, second floor. But when I arrived, the receptionist, a woman in her 60s, with glassy eyes and a whispered voice, seemed confused. She took a while to find my name, then stared at me silently for a few seconds that felt like minutes. Then she said, "Go to 209. 207 is undergoing maintenance." The key was brass, heavy, with the number engraved, but the plaque seemed ... worn, you know, as if it had been handled many times. I went up. In the hallway, the lights flickered. It felt like a scene from an old movie. When I reached the door of 209, I felt a shiver, as if the key were burning in my hand. I entered, Raven, ... The room was strange. It was like the others, but different. Everything was ... old, as if it had stopped in time. The curtains were heavy, brownish green. The bathroom mirror had black spots, and the light bulbs flickered even with the switch off. But the worst part was the smell. A sweet, old, suffocating perfume. It wasn't mold. It was like the smell of an embalmed body, and Raven. The bed had a dark velvet cover, and on top of it, there were marks, as if someone had lain there. And when I went to the bathroom, the mirror showed me something it shouldn't. The reflection showed the room behind me, but there was a figure standing in the corner. A woman, pale skin, long hair, wearing a NIGHTGOWN. But when I turned, she was no longer there. I ran out of the bathroom, tripped over the little table, and hit my elbow. The room was empty, or ... it seemed to be. I tried to sleep, but then, at exactly 2:17, I heard the noise. Footsteps ... slow, heavy ... from above. Raven ... from the ceiling, as if someone were walking above me. But I was on the top floor. Then came the whispers, words in a language I didn't understand, and the sound of the doorknob turning, but there was no one there. I locked the door and pushed the dresser against it. The next day, I went to complain. I told everything. But the receptionist looked at me with an empty smile. "Sir, room 209 has been out of service for 12 years. I fell silent. I showed her the key. She paled, said it was impossible, that 209 had been sealed. Since the incident, I asked, "What incident?" She didn't want to talk, but a younger maid, who was cleaning the lobby, approached and murmured, "A girl killed herself there. She jumped out the window. The room was closed. Sometimes ... guests get the key, but only those who are called. I left that same day. But since then ... Raven ... Every time I stay in a hotel room, I leave the door open for a few minutes. I hope to hear the footsteps on the ceiling, or to smell the dark velvet, but that's not what scares me the most. What scares me is that 2 months ago, I received a package at home. No return address, an envelope with the smell of cheap lavender. Inside, there was only one thing, the brass key with the number 209. Raven. I know you listen without judgment, and that's why I came to tell you. Because no one else would believe it. Not even I would believe it. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. If I hadn't felt the weight of it, staring at me from the other side of the wall. It all began when I moved into a small apartment in the old city center. Cheap, silent, old. It had those stucco walls, you know, rough, crumbling. The landlord said the last tenant left in a hurry, but didn't go into details. Soon in the first days, I noticed something strange on the living room wall. There was a section, slightly different, as if it had been patched up. It was rectangular, from the floor, almost to the ceiling, with a different texture smoother. PALER. On the first day, I thought it was just bad renovation. On the second, I started hearing the sound, scratching slow constant behind the wall, as if nails were scraping inside the mortar. Sometimes it would stop, but when I looked directly at the wall, I felt as if something was watching me back. On the third night, I dreamed of her. Raven. She was inside the wall, trapped between concrete and silence. A skeletal woman, grayish skin, with very wide eyes, but no pupils. She tried to scream, but her mouth was sewn shut with fine copper threads. Even so, I could hear her. Get me out of HERE. Get me out of here. I woke up in a cold sweat. But there were marks on the living room floor. Small wet footprints, coming from the wall to where I slept on the sofa. I started researching the history of the building. In 1987, a woman disappeared in that apartment. She lived alone. No one heard anything. The police entered months later, but never found a body. What they found was a recently renovated section of the living room wall. They never opened it. The following week, the terror really began. Every night at 3:13, the living room light bulb would burst. Always the one in the living room. Always at the same time. And then came the whispers, Raven. You see me. I am still here. I remember you. I began to lose my mind. I covered the wall with a sheet, but it fell every night. I painted it black, but the next day the paint peeled off by itself. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I bought a sledgehammer. I started to hit each strike. Sounded like a muffled scream, as if I were injuring something that lived inside. After hours, the wall gave way, and for a moment, I saw she was there, not a body, a thing, with human eyes but skin made of cement, thin arms like dry branches, embedded in the wall like the roots of an old tree. She smiled, not with her mouth, but with her eyes, and she said, without moving her lips, "Now you are next. Since then, the wall has repaired itself. Raven. I tried to leave. I moved to another city, to another state. But everywhere I go, there is a different wall. Pale, slightly smooth. And at 3:13, the light bulb bursts. Today, while I'm telling you this, I'm looking at the wall in front of me, and it is pulsing. Raven. If one day you come across a wall like this, don't touch it, don't speak, and never, ever listen to what it says. Because once it knows that you see it, it will never let you go. Raven. I know you've heard every kind of story, but this, this isn't just a warning, it's a curse that I'm passing on. Because if I don't tell it, I think it comes back, and I can't go back there anymore, not even in a dream. When my great-uncle died, he left me a secluded house in a forgotten village in the interior of Minas. It was a building from 1911, in European style, heavy wood, an iron fireplace, and a basement that should never be opened. According to him, of course, that was the first thing I wanted to explore. But when I arrived, I realized it wouldn't be that simple. The basement door was sealed with old iron nails and symbols, carved into the wood. One of them looked like a closed eye. Another resembled a deformed heart. Hanging on the lock was a note, in shaky handwriting. "If you feel it beating, run." In the first few days, I ignored it. The house was strangely silent, but the atmosphere was oppressive, heavy as if the air inside had memory. And on the third day, in the early morning, I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. At first I thought it was just old plumbing, but it was rhythmic, alive, like ... a pulse. And it was coming from the basement. The next day, I decided to pull out the nails. Each time a nail came out of the wood, I heard a muffled breath, like a sigh coming from inside the wall. The door fell with a crack behind it. A corridor, not a common basement, but a tunnel, lined with damp wood, roots, and walls that throbbed. Yes, the walls beat, as if they had veins, and there was something more. Along the corridor, old portraits, all depicting men and women with their eyes closed and hands crossed over their chests. In one of the frames, I recognized my great-uncle's face, but he looked younger, and there was something wrong with the portrait. His eyes were painted with fresh blood at the end of the tunnel. I found an underground hall, and in the center, suspended by chains attached to the beams, was what I can only describe as a giant heart the size of a small car. Beating, connected to the walls by veins that looked like roots. And before it, an altar. There was a diary, my great-uncle's notes. He said that it was the heart of the time of forgetting, a being that fed on human memory, and that every generation, someone had to watch over the heartbeat. If it stops, the world remembers what it forgot, and what we forgot was for protection. If it beats harder, it starts to remember us. At that moment, I heard the heart speed up. Thump, 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 thump. As if it had noticed my presence. Raven, ... I ran away. But the tunnel seemed longer than before. The walls began to weep a thick, dark liquid, and I could hear whispers. "Now you know. Now you are next." I managed to get out. I locked everything. But since that day, I've had continuous nightmares about the heart. Worse, I started forgetting simple things. My mother's name, the date of my birthday. My reflection changed. ... My left eye pulses by itself sometimes. And yesterday, I woke up with the palm of my hand marked with the same symbol that was on the basement door. Raven, ... If you ever inherit a house, and there's a sealed basement in it, with symbols that look like organs, don't go in, don't listen, don't touch, because there are things that should not be remembered, and there are hearts that should not beat. Raven, did you know that there are houses that weren't built? They were born, not with bricks, but with bones, not with cement, but with memory and oblivion. I no longer know if this is a tale or a final confession, because if you're hearing this, it's because the cycle is about to close, and I need someone to know. Maybe, ... Only you can understand. It was in the middle of the night, driving down a deserted road, that I saw it. A house on top of a hill, with no number, no name, no logic. There was no road leading to it, but there was an instinct, like a magnet buried in my chest. I parked the car. I walked. The house seemed to watch me. Even without windows, it was a misshapen structure, made of materials I couldn't identify. Wood darkened like ancient coal. Doors that whispered. A roof that moved with the wind. Even when there was no wind, at the entrance, there was a note nailed to the wall. You have been here before. even without remembering. When I entered, everything went silent. But what I found inside were not furniture, were not paintings. They were echoes in each room. A vivid reconstruction of the tales I've already told you. Raven, on the first floor, the wall bled like the stone house. In the attic, I heard whispers repeating words I had forgotten. On the stairs, the steps moved on their own, recreating the same cursed creak. There was a cracked mirror where I saw the bride with open eyes, smiling, and behind me, in the reflection, something was watching me. On the second floor, I found a corridor with numbered doors. The door opened by itself. Inside was the same hotel room with sealed curtains and the smell of contained death. And in the basement of the house, it was there the heart. The same dot, only now. Slowing down, thump, thump, dot thump. And then, in the center of the house, I saw what should never have been seen. A circular room, no ceiling. On the floor, a mark made with charcoal and bones. A circle surrounded by 8 miniature houses, each representing one of the tales. It was as if each place, each event, was a tentacle of the same thing. And in the middle, the original house, the matrix, the mind, Raven. Everything I've told was true, but it was also part of something larger. These houses are not haunted, they are the monster. Fragments of an ancient entity, dividing into pieces to continue existing among men. It spreads, it remembers, it needs witnesses, and now, you are one. Before I left, I heard a whisper coming from the floor. The next will be your house. And when I returned to the car, it was covered in dust and dry leaves. My phone displayed a date, 10 years ahead. Raven. If you ever hear a whisper coming from the walls, if the stairs creak when no one walks, if a mirror stares at you longer than it should, leave, run. Don't look back, because maybe, just maybe, you are living inside a fragment of it, and when it fully awakens, there will be nowhere to hide.